Chapter 3. How Pride Exalted as a Dominant and Superb Quality. After this memorable evening, the uncle invited me to learn some secret and really thrilling papers. Although these memoirs will never be published, I wish to remain prudent, so I will not speak of these papers. I know some people who would give a fortune even today to be able to photograph them, and it makes me laugh, because it would only suffice to invent a machine that could read my memory. During that same week, I learned a certain numerous or number of useful addresses and telephone numbers in different countries. All these precautions meant that war was close at hand. I felt an impatient desire to leave Europe because the welfare of humanity would have been endangered by my death, or even only by the degradation brought about an extended military service. My uncle made me return to his office to discuss international politics, but I was not deeply interested in that science. The uncle blamed me for this, specifying that atheism was only a branch of politics. In my inner self, I thought that atheism was the most important, and the uncle, who seemed to hear my thoughts, added, "You are right to consider atheism as primordial, as fundamental, but you still have much to learn in this matter." I agreed with the most perfect bad faith, and while keeping my impassivity, I added, "Nevertheless, I have a special idea on the general direction to be given to the fight that we are to undertake." A flash of amusement passed on my uncle's face. I believe that it was because he really loved me. I stared at him with a beat of defiance. He said to me, "Speak, but be brief. What more did I want?" I therefore said very quietly, "Instead of fighting religious sentiment, we ought to prompt it into an utopian direction." He kept silent. He was digesting my idea. "Good," he said. "Give me an example." I held the long end of the stick. In fact, it seemed to me that the whole world was in my hands at that moment. I calmly explained, "You must drive into the head of man, and particularly into the head of churchmen, to search for at any price a universal religion, into which all churches would be melded together. So that this idea could take form in life, we must inculcate in pious people, especially Roman Catholics, a feeling of guilt concerning the unique truth in which they pretend to live." Are you not yourself utopian in the second part of your proposition? No, not at all," I replied vividly. "I was Catholic, and very Catholic. I mean very pious and zealous until my 14th year, and I believed it to be rather easy to show Catholics that there are holy persons among the Protestants, the Muslims, and the Jewish, etc." "Let us admit this," he answered. "But then what sentiment will the other religions have?" "It will vary," said I, "and I still must study this aspect of the problem. But for me it is essential to strike deeply and definitely at the Catholic Church. It is the most dangerous one. And how would you use the universal church to which you would like to have all churches run?" "I see it very simply," said I. "It could not be otherwise but simple, so that all men could enter it. It could retain a vague idea of a God, more or less creator, more or less good, according to the times. Moreover, this God will be useful only in periods of calamity, and then the ancestral fear that will fill the temples, but in other times they will be rather empty." The uncle thought over a good while. Then he said to me, "I fear that the Catholic clergy will quickly notice the danger and be hostile to your plan." I replied sharply, "This is what has happened until now. My idea was launched by non-Catholics, and the Catholic Church has always closed its door to such a program. It is precisely why I wanted to study the way to make it change its mind. I know that this will not be easy, that we will have to work hard at it during 20 or 50 years. But how we should succeed in the end, by what means, by numerous and subtle means. I look at the Catholic Church as if it were a spear. To destroy it, you must attack in the numerous small points until it loses its resemblance to what it was before. We will have to be very patient. I have many ideas that might seem to be, at first, to be petty and childish, but I maintain that the entirety of those petty childishness will become an invisible weapon of great efficacy. Well, the uncle told me, you will have to prepare me a short plan of your project. Slowly, I picked up my portfolio, took out an envelope which contained the precious work of the development of my ideas. I laid these ideas, or this document, on his desk with invisible satisfaction. The uncle started at once to read it, something I'd never dared to hope. This proved to me that he was laying great hopes in me. How he had reason to do so, and the dear old man. After reading this, which took him more time than necessary, the uncle looked at me and said, I will have this work examined by my counselors. You will return for an answer in 8 days and at the same hour. Meanwhile, prepare your departure for Poland. Take this, he told me, extending to me an envelope that was generously filled with rubles, more than I had ever had. It took in plenty of theaters and movies and bought a large number of books. I did not know how to ship them, but I thought that the uncle could see that by some kind of diplomatic shipping container. I lived 8 days in such a state of exaltation that I could no more feel my body and could scarcely sleep. To me, the question came up, and it was the first time, to decide whether I should try to meet a woman. But in the state of mental excitement that I found myself in, I thought it was not worthwhile. I even feared that such a lowly animal action might bring bad luck to my project and actually being studied by the highest authorities of the service. Was it not important before all else that I should then there jump over many ranks and go ahead of the largest number possible of the 1,024 predecessors of mine, who could not surely be so worthy as I was? One night, I tried to intoxicate myself to find out if my brains would receive a useful impulse from it, but nothing came out. I can affirm that alcohol is more harmful than religion, and that is saying a lot. When the time came to present myself again at my uncle's office, my heart was beating a little more quickly than normal, but it was not disagreeable. The important thing was that no one would notice it. The uncle looked at me a long time, then he told me, with a half smile, that his chief wanted to become acquainted with me, as it was certain that such a high official would not put himself out just to let me know his displeasure. I was not at all impressed by this convocation, but on the other hand, I was horrified by the exterior aspect of his famous chief. Horrified is the correct word to use, and 30 years later, I only have to close my eyes to see him again and to feel his presence. He has such a presence that all the others seem to be only puppets. I hate that feeling, but I must add that this presence of his was that of a monster. How can one accumulate in one and the same person? Brutality, coarseness, ruse, sadism, vulgarity. This man must surely be one of those who visit prisoners in order to delight themselves in tortures. But I have a deep disgust for cruelty, which is, I am sure, a sign of weakness. As I despise all kinds of weakness, I could ever accept the uncle showing himself so servile in the presence of the brute who received us. The brute acted like a chief, all chief. He began by looking fixedly into my eyes to see. To see what? With me there is nothing to see. There will never be anything to see, comrade, thought I with satisfaction. Then the chief asked me what I cared for most. It was easy for me to say the triumph of the party, whereas the truth held more subtly. Did the chief have none? It was unthinkable. Then he added in a slightly neglected tone, "Far from now on, you are on the list of our active secret agents. You will give orders every week. I rely on your zeal. I really admit that it will take a long time to destroy all religions from within. Nevertheless, it is necessary that the orders which you will give find an echo, notably among writers, journalists, and even theologians. It is to be understood that we have a team who watches the religious writings of the whole world, and it gives advice in the useless of directives given by such or such an agent. Therefore, do your best to please. I have high hopes because it seems to me that you have already understood it by yourself, all by yourself." The brute was not an idiot. He would hear about my work. Of this I was sure. I know too well the vulnerability of Christians to doubt about of my future success. I believe that the vulnerability can be entitled charity. As a mention of this sacrosanct word, charity, we can inoculate them with any kind of remorse, and remorse is always a state of lowered resistance. It is at the same time medical and mathematical, which even though they do not go together, nevertheless I marry those two elements. I saluted the chief in a dignified manner and thanked him coldly. I did not wish him to imagine that he had impressed me. I was again alone with Uncle. I refrained from making the least comment on this so very famous chief. Rather, I congratulated myself that this personage was so unpleasant because I was cured in advance of all timidity toward the great of this world. And I always came to the same conclusion, that all in all, it was the greatest.